Okay, so we are going to start on lecture 3 today. So I'm about halfway complete with my bootstrap slides. So that is the tentative plan, as I stated, I think on lecture 2, to cover that on Thursday. I'm trying to reserve concepts to try to do everything in one lecture if possible, or as much as possible in one lecture, so that the content can be viewed in a single video. So since we were able to cover the basics behind HTML, since we were able to cover the basics behind CSS, I think it's apt now to give a quick little crash course in the browser tools, or what developer tools Chrome and Mozilla Firefox and whatnot provide to developers to make creating and analyzing your web code much easier on the client side. So we're going to spend today's lectures just taking a look at how we can use Chrome in particular, because that's the required browser that I selected for this course. How we can use browser to view HTML, view the in-memory DOM, be able to access the JavaScript console, be able to inspect an element, and all that kind of great stuff that we're going to have to know how to do as we continue to move forward. Okay, so the first thing I want to kind of discuss in this browser tools crash course is just the various viewing modes that we have inside of our browser. So let's go here. So this is the current lab that everyone is currently working on, because the previous lab was due on Friday, and I got 100% of a turn-in on that. So that's great. I'm super happy with everybody. So I know that everyone is now on this lab right now. So by default, whenever I go to open an HTML document, the default application that your OS selects is the browser. And when the browser initially parses the HTML document, it actually renders the contents of it into the viewport. Now, this is obviously ideal for the end user. This is how we want HTML documents to go ahead and be displayed. But as a developer, it might be the case where you want to inspect the source code of an HTML document as it were delivered to the browser, and not necessarily after it's been parsed and rendered into the display port, as the viewport. And so if that's the case, what we can do here is we can preface our URL. So notice right here, I've just opened up a local file. I'll show you the same thing on something that was delivered by HTTP though. I can just do view-source and then colon. So I can prefix the URL with this command. And what that will do for me is, instead of showing in the viewport the rendered HTML document, it can show you the actual HTML tags, all the HTML elements. So this is a really beneficial way if you're like scouring the internet, and if you see something that you might like over the course of this semester that you want to emulate or you want to learn from. This is a great way to see how those pages are being rendered into your browser. And again, this is a capability. This is a capability that's available on let's go over to cs.uno.edu. I think that's what it's already, yeah, it just comes here. So I could do the same thing here. Notice here I'm in HTTP. I can just go to view source and it'll do the same thing. It shows me all the source that's associated with this particular HTML document. Okay, so that's relatively simple. Let's go back over here. So our default view obviously is to display HTML, but we can also check the source code. And we do that by using view source and then whatever your URL is. So the next thing I want to actually look at is the actual dev tools. So let's go back over to our example here. Let's kick out. Okay. So if I go to my view option to developer, I have the ability to select to view go into developer tools. So this is what we're going to live and breathe in while we go ahead and do any kind of analysis or debugging of our front-end applications. So it's worth taking a little bit of time just to see what is happening inside of this pane. So you'll see there's a number of different submenu options inside of the developer tools. The first of which is going to be the elements option. And so what the element options displays here is what the in-memory HTML is. And so this is typically what would be referred to as our DOM, or document object model. So whenever we go ahead and load an HTML document into the browser constructs that document to be displayed into memory. And so the powerful thing about this in-memory representation of the original HTML is that we can change the state of this, and anything that gets changed inside of this in-memory representation, this DOM, will get re-rendered into the viewport of our browser. So to give you an example of this, this isn't just a view. I can select in here and even and select to edit. Let's see here. There we go. So here I can change the in-memory from CSS crash course, which is what is in the original HTML file, and just change this to Ted was here. And let's click out, and you'll see inside my viewport, it'll go ahead and re-render in our instance of the application inside our memory that new content. Now, I can't stress this enough. All we're doing is changing what's loaded in memory to this browser. We're not editing the original HTML file. I'm really trying to highlight the idea that the way that we get interactive, dynamic web content is that we take the initial contents of an HTML page, we load that into browser memory, and then this representation, which is called the document object model representation, is then mutable. We can then update that, and any changes we might make to that will get updated here inside of our viewport. And so it's worth going over this because this is the approach that Bootstrap uses, and this is the approach that we're going to learn how to use with JavaScript to make our web pages more responsive, which means that it can go ahead and make decisions on how the content's going to be displayed, or it can update the contents of it, of what's in memory based off of user interactions. Okay. Now, with that said, recall that we talked about the box model last lecture in our CSS lesson. So here, I just want to illustrate that you can actually inspect inside of the elements pane here, the ability to delve into any particular HTML element that you have selected. So for instance, the one I have selected here is highlighted. It says paragraph, the body is set to gray using the element selector. So it's showing me the actual pixel resolution of this, right? So 583 by 18, and showing me that it's got 0 padding, it's got 0 border, and it's got 16 margin. So you can inspect the box model of any HTML element from the elements pane as well. And again, this is useful not only for debugging your own HTML content, but also being able to inspect other HTML content you might come across online in case you wanted to learn or emulate from various styles. And then in addition to that, you can even check each individual style as you select it. So if I go and select here, for instance, notice right here, it's going to show me the style information, all the CSS associated with that particular HTML element. So the elements not only shows me what HTML is loaded in memory, but what CSS stylings are being applied to that. It even gives me the color as it's represented based off of the text color and the background color. And then the default attributes that have been applied towards that particular HTML element. So again, this is a very powerful tool to be able to debug on your HTML, to be able to debug on your CSS, to be able to actually inspect within the browser to see what is the browser seeing, how is it parsing it, how is it displaying it, and what is the data with all the various decisions it's making to display to your viewport. Okay, so that was the elements view there. And so we talked briefly about the document object model and how that exists in the browser. That's going to become critically more important to us when we move on to JavaScript and we start using JavaScript to modify or mutate the document object model to have it update the state of our viewport. So the next thing I want to show is from the developers tools, we can actually also access our JavaScript interpreter. So let's go back over here. And so that's going to be your second option. So on your console here, you can actually interact with any JavaScript code associated with this site. You can invoke functions from it. You can inspect functions from it. You can also write, since it's an interpreter, you can actually write JavaScript code right in here and execute it. I'll give you just an example of a hello world that we can run. So console.log. And there we go. We can see it'll then immediately execute that instruction since this is an interpreter. But what's really nice about this is the console that is loaded in association with the HTML document page that's currently being displayed. So if I were to go to another URL, let's go to, let's see here. I guess let's just go to google.com. Okay, there we go. So if I go to my developer tools here, then you'll see all these errors that are generating from the console. And they're generating from failed load services that are happening inside those particular scripts. So if at any time you wanted to see what JavaScript applications are being load up from your HTML document, this is a great place to not only evaluate and inspect the code, but to debug the code, because all your error messages will populate inside this console. Again, we'll cover this more, but this will be today will be a general walkthrough of how we're going to use the browser to further our ability to debug. And if I click up here, you'll see it actually shows these errors here. And if you click on any one of these errors, it would show you in the source code where that error should have populated at. Okay. Close out of Google. Okay, and the last thing I kind of want to show in relation with developers tools, I guess there's one other thing I can show too. Actually, let's go back to Google, Google Drive. Let's go to cs.unite.edu. Okay, so here on cs.unite.edu, if I go to my developer tools, I not only can take a look at what HTML, the HTML representation, the CSS, and what JavaScript code is being launched in support of this page, but I can also check the network activity. And in fact, let me leave that up and refresh the page. And you'll see all the content that gets loaded between the web server and the web client is easily visible for you right here inside this network pane, where you can see all the individual files, the PNGs, the JPEGs, the CSS files, whatever is required for this page to load has to get transmitted from the web server to the web client. And we can inspect not only what those file names are, what the status codes are, which we'll talk about more later, and what the file type is, but also the duration it takes to load those from our web server to our web client. The rest of this, I don't think, is too important as of now. Okay. And so the last thing I want to highlight here is, let me close this out with developer tools, is if there's a particular element that you want to inspect from the viewport, you should be able to just right click, hit inspect, and it'll jump directly to that element so that you can inspect it in the dev tools. So that way you don't necessarily have to traverse the HTML tree of a very large HTML document to find a particular thing. You can always just identify that thing from your viewport, and it'll jump into the DOM in the DevTools page or a pane for where that is located at. Okay. So we talked a little bit about how we can display the source code versus the rendered. We talked about the dev tools and some of the basic operations that we can use in there. I do want to distinguish at this point the difference between using the file protocol versus the HTTP protocol inside of our browser. Up till now, likely we have all been using the file protocol. And so when I say that, what do I mean? I mean, right here, notice inside my URL bar, the URL bar supports a couple of different communication protocols. The most common that we will use is the file protocol, which means I just double click somewhere on my local storage, somewhere on my hard drive, like in my desktop, on an HTML file, and it loads from my hard drive directly into the browser. So in order to open this file, it uses without using a web server, it uses a special mode called the file protocol, which is actually a restricted mode for security reasons. So this does allow us to do some limited testing of our HTML pages, where we can see the headings, we can see the paragraphs, we can see the CSS stylings, but I can't stress this enough. This is actually a limited view or a limited set of options for our HTML web page. So to stress this in another way, there are things that I can do in HTML when it is deployed on a web server that I will not be able to experience if I load it in the file protocol. And so examples of this might be to start audio when the page initially loads. So suppose you're building your interactive story and you want a song to start playing as soon as the page loads. That is a possibility, but you can't do it if you are hosting your web page through the file protocol. That is a option that's only available through HTTP. Another example of this would be using trying to load in some concepts into the Canvas element. Sometimes the Canvas element, which allows to do graphics, computer graphics through the browser, sometimes for some of those options requires you to have your HTTP delivered via HTTP as opposed to file. And I'll show a distinction of that in just a moment. So I just want to highlight that as we move forward, if you want to truly test your web page, we don't want to limit ourselves to just open it as we have been. This is good when we're initially starting to do web development, but effectively what you're going to want to do is actually deploy a local web server and host your files from there, and then just go to localhost on your browser. So you're actually using an HTTP request so that you can unlock all the features of your browser. So let's see here. Let's actually do an example of that. So right now, this is the interactive story game that we have right now. So if we have, let me see if I can remember these operations. So if I start here, and if I choose option 1, and then if I go to decision 1, oh yeah, I have the option to play this music here. Now, I don't think, I might have to unplug my headphones here. Let me see here. Let me unplug my headphones, see if you guys can hear this music. So is that loud enough for everyone to hear? Okay, perfect. Okay, so imagine if what I wanted to do was I wanted this music to play as soon as it loaded to this option inside of my interactive story. Let's go and change our code to do that. So I'm going to go into my source code. What is this? This is lab 1. This is I think I've just loaded into version 2, so we'll just mutate it here. So that was, I believe it's chapter 2A. So let's go to open with Visual Studio Code. I have 2 different versions. That's weird. Okay, so here is my audio. So I'm going to update this. Right now, my audio settings is to have controls, but I want to hide the controls. I don't want the player to have control. What I want to do is I want this to autoplay. Yeah, I want this to autoplay, and I want it to loop so that it continues to play for as long as the player is on here. Now, autoplay on music, we were able to get autoplay to work with video, but keep in mind, let me grab the video so I can. So we were able to autoplay with the video and loop the video, but notice we also had the option muted. And the reason why the muted option was toggled on in lab 1 was that the video would not play unless we muted it. And so that's actually the limitation, is that the only way that you can have autoplay, the autoplay option toggled on an audio component, is if it's delivered through HTTP and if the user had instigated some action prior to that audio component loading. And so the rationale behind these decisions by the browser makers is that there used to be these really annoying pop-ups that that advertisers would use that would instantly come onto your screen and then say a really annoying message in a really high volume, something like, hey, you've won, or attention, or you're infected with a virus. And so unfortunately, there are features in the browser that get used for nefarious reasons, and they just become annoying. So because of that, browser manufacturers try to suppress things that might provide a bad user experience. And so now if you want audio to automatically play, it has to happen based off of the user interacting with your web page. It can't happen on its own. Okay, so if I make these changes, these options are not available in the file protocol. So if I were to load this page, I'm not going to hear anything. And we're actually going to test that. So let me make sure this is saved. Yeah, save that. Let us go back to uh-oh. I feel like my computer just froze. Okay, I gotta wait just a moment. Okay, is everyone else still there with me? I feel like my computer just froze a moment ago. Okay.
Yeah, you did.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let me go back. So I'm gonna refresh here from, go there, go to decision 1. And so here is the audio. Notice since I removed controls, controls are no longer there, but there's also no music that's playing. And let me make sure that my sound's all the way up. And the reason why this is the case, and actually let me go to my developer tools here. Does it report any error? Nope, no error. So I was able to load everything. Yeah, is able to load everything, but it does not play because I'm in this file protocol. So if I were to go ahead and deliver this HTML document to my browser via a web server, via a HTTP protocol, this feature should work fine. And so so you can use a number of applications to run a simple HTTP server. You can use Python, you can use Node. I'm going to advocate just using something very simple. You could actually use Chrome as a web server. So for now, unless you're already familiar with running your own web server, which isn't a difficult prospect, we could just get a tool in Chrome. So if you just search Chrome web server, it should bring you to the Chrome store right here, to bring you to the Chrome store, and you can go ahead and install this application. So I would recommend getting that application at least until we start to learn how to launch our own web server to be able to test your website with the HTTP protocol. So how do we access that? So whenever you open up a tab in Chrome, notice there's this apps option here in the menu right underneath the URL bar. So if you click on that, it gives you your list of all your Chrome apps. If I select to run that application, you'll see that I have this option where I can go ahead and choose a folder to deliver as my web server, to host from my web server, which is going to be this this app. So I'm going to go ahead and choose a folder. It should allow you to navigate. Mine is in the desktop. It is, let's see, it's web dev, it's lab 1. And I think I'm in lab 1 version 2 right here. So I'm going to select that. And let's see here. And so now notice here, I'm not accessing that from the file protocol. It's actually through the URL, through the HTTP protocol. So look at the difference. Here it highlights to me that I'm in file. Here, there's no file specifier. The default specifier is just whatever the URL is. And so here you can see I'm at localhost at port 8887. So that's the default port. That's the default, and this is your local host to be able to go ahead and host content locally. So now if I navigate through, let's see if it doesn't play that. It should loop. Yeah, okay, perfect. Now notice, if I refresh the page though, it does not play. Right, so even on HTTP, it will not play if I initially have autoplay loaded when the page initially launched. So the reason behind why it plays when I do this versus if I just refresh is that user interaction bit. So the user had to interact with this hyperlink to load into this page, whereas I'm just loading this page and there's no actual interaction within the viewport itself. So it refuses to go ahead and load that. So that's just a little bit of information. If you're trying to work with audio and you couldn't understand why you could get autoplay to work like you could get video to work, there's a little bit more restrictions for audio versus video for the autoplay option. But it leads to a much more important understanding that you should, whenever possible, test your front-end applications through a web server and not by directly just opening them up as a file, because you do have a different set of options and features available in your browser. And so if you want to realistically test how your application will run in a real-world environment, it should be hosted through a web server. It should not be through the file protocol. So this is just an important thing to understand now, so we can start talking about testing practices as we start moving forward. Okay. I think that was a relatively, okay, so the limitations of the audio, yeah, and then use HTTP versus, okay, perfect. So we talked about the difference between file protocol versus HTTP protocol. The other big thing I would say is, let me go back over here to my local host. Notice that whenever I open up, whenever a web server delivers an HTML file, it is going to be wherever that the web server is located at in terms of the URL. And then it's finished by the actual name of the HTML document. So for instance, we had chapter 2-a.html. If I just put in that root directory, it opens up this particular page. So notice this does not display a index.html page, which is what we call that. In fact, if I explicitly type index.html, notice it does actually open index.html. But if I omit any HTML pathway inside of this URL, it still loads the index.html. And so the explanation for that is the power of calling your root HTML document index.html. is that when the browser initially tries to launch or contact a web server, and it gets back an index.html page, it treats that as the root page, and it does not display that inside of the URL bar. So the default root HTML document should always be called index.html. And if it is, you get to define what the initial behavior is that displays when that web domain opens up. And if you don't define that web domain, it'll just show like a listing of what files are available. So I'll give you an example of, let's see if I can't show an example of that. Let's load into my Chrome, or this might already be open here. So let's choose a different folder that does not have an index.html page. So let's host from here, for instance, from the assets directory. Okay, so now I'm going to launch this asset. Since there's no index.html, this would be the behavior when the web browser goes to try to open without having an HTML document preloaded into the pathway. There's no root HTML document to display, so it's just going to display the contents of what's available from this directory. And then you could select any one of these. Anyway, so I just want to highlight why we call our initial page index.html. It's a reason to do with how the pages initially render when prompted from the web server. Okay, the next thing I want to show is I want to go through the concept of how to actually take an HTML document and get it deployed onto the internet using GitHub. So you might have seen in the previous submission, I wanted the homework assignments, and eventually we're going to migrate to this. I wanted the homework assignments to actually be live online so that it was publicly viewable. And so GitHub is a great repository. It's an online repository that allows developers to create free accounts and push their source code so that the community can go ahead and not only read, but potentially augment it. But they also allow you to use your repository as a static web server. And so the distinguishing characteristics between a static web server and a dynamic web server is that a static web server is a web server that only responds to one type of request. It's to deliver HTML documents. And that's the only interaction it has with the web client. A dynamic web server is one that not only will deliver the initial HTML documents to the web client or the web browser, but it can also accept additional requests, such as producing login, allowing you to log in or manage state, or be able to get some kind of additional requests and respond to that outside of just HTML documents. So you can't do any backend. So anything that requires backend logic is going to be a dynamic web server. That is not supported by GitHub Pages, but GitHub Pages does go ahead and support just client-side applications. So we'll use that for the first half of this course to actually get your homeworks publicly available and live. So I want to walk through that process real quick so that you could see how that would work. So the first thing you have to do to be able to do this is, let's see. Let's do GitHub. So let's go to GitHub's website. So when I initially launched into GitHub's website, I'm already logged in. If you're not already logged in, you should strive to go ahead and create an account. It's free to make an account with GitHub, and it's a great, great service. And you should have an account with GitHub anyway so that you can publish all of your source code from your various assignments or personal projects and then cite that on your resume. It's just great work. It's a great place for credentialing. So if I want to publish a web page on GitHub, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a repository that's going to hold my web pages index.html page or all the HTML documents. It'll contain any of the CSS files, all my JavaScript files, anything that this web page needs. I'm going to publish it onto GitHub. So first thing I need to do is create a repository. Let's call this a simple web page. Can I just make web page? Have I already used that yet? Oh, that's available. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create something that's just going to be my web page, whatever the name is going to be. Think carefully of what this repo name is going to be, because that's going to be because that's going to appear in the URL. We're going to make this public, and let's just create this repository. So the first thing I'm going to do, create this repository. You'll then get a link such that you can go ahead and clone this repository. Perfect. So I'll grab that link. Let's see here. And then let's go here. I'll open up a terminal. Okay, I'll open up a terminal. That's not quite what I wanted. Okay, new terminal, new window. Now let's see here. How did that mess me up by having my terminal? That is not where I want to be at. Now I got to find where everyone went inside my various windows. It's one. Okay, there we go. One annoying thing about OS X is that default behavior is to just go to your desktop that has the most recent application you're looking for. Okay, so let's see where I'm at. I am in the root directory, so let me go into my desktop. Okay, that's fine. And okay, this is perfect. I'll just go ahead and clone this. So let's do git clone, and I will go ahead and paste that. Okay, so far this is probably similar to what you've done in your Java classes. So we have my web page here. So now I'm going to load in some content there. So let me move this browser out the way. So let's say, do I have this? Okay. Let me use what is my sample code for lab 3. So let me go here, lab 3. Perfect. So I have lab 3 right here. This looks like it. Okay, so let me grab all this. I'll go into here, and I'll just go ahead and paste this. Excellent. I don't need that. So I have an index.html. I have projects. So essentially, I just have all this HTML and all of these, everything that I need, all of my assets, whatever scripts or styles or whatnot that's associated, defined inside here. Okay, so let's go back over here. Let's check the status of that. So git status. Let's make sure that there's stuff. Oh, nope. Need to actually move into that directory. So let's go into our web page directory. Okay, let's clear this. It's getting kind of noisy. Now let's check the status of that. Okay, so let's see. DS store. Oh, I don't want the DS store stuff in there. Let me do this. Go DS store and throw that into a .git ignore. So now let's see here. Okay, so now notice now DS store is not and no longer something that is illustrated as red, which is an untracked file, because I created a git ignore file to say I did not want to push DS store files into my project. Okay, so let me do this then. I'll just go ahead and add. Okay, now let me check, clear that, and I'll check my status again. Okay, perfect. So everything's in the green. So I've added everything that's part of this project. So now I'll do git commit. I'll include a message, and the message will be added my HTML project. Perfect. And then finally, let me just push that. So let me, oh, I might have some bigger files in there. Also, let me put my headphones back in. Test, test, 1, 2, 3, test, test. Is that better, by the way, using the headphones?
It sounds about the same.
Okay. Okay, this will take just a few moments because I think I included a relatively big file inside of this test case. So this is another thing that I kind of want to query you guys on. This is, so I finished what I anticipate to be a example lab 3, but I'm not sure if I'm going to scale it down or not. So you'll get a chance to see what my original vision was, but as I continue to write up my step-by-steps, I might actually make it a little bit simpler because it might be lengthier to show you the amount of complexity in Bootstrap. Okay, so while we wait for that, I'll come back to this. We don't have to watch something constantly update. We'll come back to see how to finish deploying that. I already explained with index.html why it's important to have your root HTML document named as such. So while we wait for that, let me show you some features in Discord. Let's see, yeah, seems to be hanging it around 60% to check the size of that document. Okay, where'd my Discord go? Nope, not there. Not there. Okay. Kind of scared to launch it from here. And we're going to end up on my system. Let's quit that. Okay. So here, perfect. So I'm here, yeah, here. Okay, perfect. So let me launch Discord from here. Okay, this will be really quick and simple, and then we'll move back on over to publishing our page on GitHub Pages. So I just want to show that if you're communicating either with me or with others, there's a really simple way to get syntax highlighting inside of our communications. If you hit the tick or it's the same tilde key, but it's not the tilde, it's the tick character. If you hit it 3 times, it allows you to insert a code block, and then you can type in without any spaces what type of syntax highlighting you want. So suppose you want HTML. I just type in HTML. Now I can hit enter as much times as I want, and it's not going to publish until I close out of those ticks with 3 other ticks. So suppose I do something like HTML, and notice it's going to give me that nice highlighting that you would expect if you were like in a code editor. So this will be just something that'll help facilitate instead being able to share code more readily and rapidly as we get into this, as the semester progresses and it becomes more difficult to do the code, and we have to share bits of code more often. This is a great way of being able to share it. Let me do just a p tag there. There we go, and hello. Perfect. Okay, so let me close that out, hit enter, and you'll see it publishes it with all that syntax hiding. It also supports CSS, right? So we can go ahead and just make a declaration. Let's do like a hashtag hello. I could do like color green. And it also supports JavaScript. But you know it supports it when it turns it green. So let's do what we did before, console.log. There we go. It supports other languages too, but those are going to be the 3 that we would care most about. So if you want to share source code with me, please, when you go to embed it into a Discord message, it helps for readability to apply the syntax highlighting markdown. Okay, so let me hop back on over here. And so I'm finally done publishing that. So I not only get to show you how to deploy a web page onto GitHub Pages, but I can get your perspective if you, from the class to see if this would be interesting as it were, or if I should scale it back. So now I'm going to refresh. So this is my username, and then this is my repo name. So I'll call this web page, very generic name. Should have called it like portfolio page or something, because that's what the next lab is going to focus on, is building a portfolio page inside of using Bootstrap. And so here, notice all of a sudden I have all of my documents. That's perfect. So let's see here. I'm going to go to, let me expand this out further. So you're going to see at the very top, I have the option to go to settings for my repo. So like code, issues, pull requests, all these different options you have. The very last one is settings. So I'm going to toggle onto settings. I can rename the repo. Don't care about that. What I do care about is going down here, the middle, to this section called GitHub Pages. And the default is not to publish your project as a GitHub page. So I'm going to say I do want to publish my project, and I want to publish it from the master branch. And then it's going to look at the root directory and serve from the root directory master branch as a static web server. So I will tell it to go ahead and save. And so if I go and scroll down to that option again, it should give me what the URL. There you go. Your site is ready to be published at. And so now this is a live public link. So that's all I have to do. If you push your HTML projects, if you push your web application projects, as long as it's client-side application, so it just needs the index.html page and any associated like JavaScript or CSS files or whatnot, you can easily host those from your GitHub pages to any browser. And then you can share this link. And what's great about this is actually you can even have, if you manage your own domain names, you can have your domain name actually link or point towards this this host. So you can actually get free online hosting, and it's something ridiculously cheap, like $12 a year to own your own domain name that you can then point to this. So it's a great way to brand yourself when it comes time to build your portfolio page. Now I'm going to click on this link. It might take a few moments for the actual page to go live. So we'll take a look to see if it's live. Oh, no, it's here. It's already live. So yeah, this was the big asset that took a little bit of time to go ahead and push initially. It's so the background you see here is a video embedded into a Jumbotron, and it just loops over the entire time. So just a way to add a little bit of dynamicness to your landing page. And so the initial options here, and so this is Bootstrap, the entire point of Bootstrap, and we'll talk more about this on Thursday when we do the Bootstrap lab. But Bootstrap offers responsive web applications made very simple. So what that means is I'm in a desktop mode right now, right? Or I'm in a landscape mode right now. That means the height is larger than the width. And this is the common kind of viewing perspective from a laptop or a desktop. But if I were on a mobile phone, it would probably look more like this, more like portrait mode, where it is higher than it is wide. So the entire point of Bootstrap is to offer you, as a developer, a quick and easy set of tools that will look beautiful on all devices, whether it's published, whether it's designed to be viewed in portrait mode or in landscape mode. So here, anyway, let's see. I can click on the code section. This would be where you can go ahead and like highlight all of the different coding projects you've done. I can click on the blog. And so this uses cards, a concept in cards in Bootstrap, which again, something that would be fully dynamic. We would have our blog. This is using a carousel to highlight how a carousel might work. And so I can click here, for instance, to go to blog post 1. Or I can cycle through. That's blog post 2, blog post 3. I can get to an about page. Again, notice with the about page, right now I have that idea that we talked about previously where we had a grid style approach to defining our web content, where we have like a row here, we have 2 columns here. You can see we kind of have all of our data organized here. We actually have like nested grids right here and here. And so Bootstrap's really great because you can define breakpoints. When you define breakpoints, you can make some content just disappear altogether. So in a landscape mode, maybe this is how I wanted to describe the about section of myself, where I have like this on the right-hand side, maybe something about education, something about links, something about what my name is. And then I have this bigger picture to really, where you can really get a better impression of who I am, and then a little blurb about me and my set of skills as displayed as a collection of icons. But notice as I go and collapse it into be portrait mode, in order to fit the content, I can turn columns into rows, right? All of a sudden, this column on the left becomes the topmost row. And so now that this picture is so big, I can opt to remove the second picture. This isn't done with any coding whatsoever. This is all done using just class names defined inside Bootstrap. And then finally, just like a contact section, which again, the point of this would be to be responsive. Anyway, so this is just a quick example of the type of project we'll be building with Bootstrap. I actually have been writing out the instructions to build this actual site, but I might make it simpler just to reduce the number of steps. I'd actually be interested to get a feedback on that from you guys. If it's worth the additional steps to do something like this, or if you prefer something simpler from the get-go. I'm kind of leaning towards simplifying this. But more importantly, this is how we can publish this content. In fact, if I share this, I'm just now realizing if I were to share that, you could view that on your device as well. Okay, let me close out Discord. Okay, so let's see here. I was able to talk about syntax highlighting. I was able to talk about how to deploy. This is a big thing. Is there any questions about how I just deployed that web service, that website onto GitHub Pages? Because that's definitely going to be something that I'm going to want everyone to start doing for all the homeworks. The idea behind the homeworks is that they are publicly available, so that after you make your own portfolio page, you will link all of at least your web application homeworks in the project section. And I would recommend that you do your projects that you've already personally done, or that you've worked for other classes. So any like interesting Java code, or any interesting system programming concepts, or OS courses, or AI courses, or whatnot, I would recommend publishing through GitHub Pages and linking them in your project section inside your portfolio. So the kind of last thing I want to talk about before I open it up for questions, since this is more or less kind of just exploring tools and technologies that we're going to be using to test our front end and learn more about what's happening, debugging and analyzing what's happening in our front end, is just some front end playgrounds that you might want to explore. The way that I'm really trying to design the class is that the lectures are going to be designed to kind of convey the motivational problems that we encounter building web applications, and talk about the technologies that exist to solve those problems, and kind of talk about at a high level how those technologies work. And then the labs are going to really be designed in a way to take these abstract concepts we're talking about inside these lectures and apply them in a real, tangible, concrete way. So you can actually see and practice how this stuff works. And that way, really what I'm trying to do is build a bridge between the abstract and the concrete, so that you can either move up or down at any time. I think it's very valuable to be able to go ahead and if you're looking at a concrete example of something, to understand notionally, oh, this is what's happening in the larger grand scheme of things. And on the inverse to that, oh, I understand how all this stuff works, and this is actually how it's put into practice. It's important to be able to move up and down that sequence. But on top of that, I have the homeworks after the labs designated for you to be able to show me that you understand how to use this on your own, and not necessarily require me to show you how to do it. So this is where I talk about a tool, I show you how to use a tool, and then I hand that tool to you, and then you show me that you can use that tool. And so for that reason, I make the homeworks a lot more open-ended than the labs are. And that's because I want 35 different homework assignments effectively. I want each homework assignment to be a reflection of you as an individual, so that if you're going to use this as a portfolio piece, it will not be an impressive portfolio piece if everyone in the class has the same thing. Because that means if you go into an interview and you're going to show that off, and someone else from UNO who took this course shows off what they did, and I mandated that you do make the same thing, then it kind of destroys the quality of that being a impressive portfolio piece. And so I lean more towards having you design your own application based off of these tools, so that your piece is going to be different than everyone else in this class, so that you can show it off as a portfolio project. But for that reason, it's important that you understand how to deploy your own applications, at least initially, onto GitHub Pages. So is there any questions with that? Did that process seem simple enough? It's pretty much just using Git the way you've learned how to use Git. Then you just go into the settings and you just toggle GitHub Pages to look at your root directory. Oh, I need to click in here. Let's see, does GitHub support hosting multiple pages or multiple different projects? Oh yeah, so it does. You can just make a GitHub repo for every single in fact, I'm glad you brought that up, because this is one thing that would happen in Java 1, and this was fine in Java 1, but something you do want to move away from is you would put all of your source code into one singular repo. And so in the real world, when you're working on things that are not just homework or lab assignments, you don't want to use that approach to organize your source code. You want to actually make a distinct and individual repo for every singular project. And so there's a number of reasons for that. It's easier for you to manage. It's easier for you to collaborate on different individual projects with other people. And it's easier for discoverability, to be able to discover a particular project if a repo is dedicated for that singular project. So GitHub will allow you to make as many individual repos as you want. And so when you start publishing your projects, say, for instance, you're publishing your portfolio, you should make a unique, just like I made a unique repo called web page or whatever, it should be a repo that's very well articulates what this repo is. So if it's for your portfolio page, you can call it just portfolio. And then you can go ahead and load whatever documents you need into there. So let's say you're talking about building a portfolio that will then link to other web applications. So to keep this simple, let's say it's other client-side web applications. So these could all be applications hosted on GitHub Pages. Then if you want to host one of those applications, you would go and create a new repo. Let's say that you built a calculator. So then go ahead and create a repo called calculator. Move all of your calculator application, your web application stuff into that repo, publish it, and actually go ahead and toggle it to be its own GitHub page. And so the URL for that, so recall my URL here was web page. Oh no, I think my computer froze. But if I had another repo, let's say here, let's say I made a repo for outreach. Notice it's still my username followed by GitHub followed by IO, but then it'd be whatever that repo is. So UNO game camp. So I actually have, and this is publicly facing as well. So I can actually access this and this both from my GitHub account, but because I have different repos that serve these individual index.html files, it goes ahead and publishes it essentially through this file path. So yeah, so you can have any number of repos and they can all be public facing and you can all have them available through GitHub Pages and then link from one to the other. Since this URL is public, Like, for instance, let me prove this. If I were, my computer is spazzing out. Okay, so let's say I go here. I just hope that, okay, so let me go here. So just to prove this concept to you, I will go ahead and share this in the chat, and then everyone who would navigate their browser should be able to go ahead and access that, essentially that game gallery page that's essentially just hosted right on GitHub Pages. Excellent. So today, I think we did a quick crash course in the developer tools, how we can use them to inspect HTML, how to mutate the DOM and what it means to mutate the DOM, how it instantly can render the changes into the viewport, how we can also see what the loaded CSS stylings are for any given element, how we can inspect the console to see what JavaScript is loaded for any given HTML document. We talked about the differences between HTTP and file and why we should always preference to use HTTP, especially for testing for something that's supposed to be deployed. We can test in a multitude of ways. You can host a local web server using either Python or Node or even just Chrome using a Chrome app. Or you could also deploy your service right through GitHub Pages and make it available there as well and refresh it and make changes and push those changes and refresh. And so I want to show a couple of front-end playgrounds too. So as you work throughout the semester, one of the best ways to learn how to do things better is to essentially see what other professionals are doing. So you should never feel that you exist in isolation or exclusion from the rest of the web dev community. The only way you will grow as a developer, regardless of what subdomain you're in, is to be able to constantly be reading and seeing other projects and other people's code. It's the only way that you do not stagnate. And so for that reason, I recommend every so often go into some playgrounds where you can see what's happening in terms of like the community and what projects are being shared. And so I like CodePen. For front-end perspectives, CodePen is a great tool. So you can go over here and just kind of research. You can just look at things. Like let's say I go to portfolio here and I just type that in. It'll bring up individual users who have decided to share their example of maybe a portfolio page. And then you can click on any one of these. It'll show you their HTML code. It'll show you their CSS code. It'll show you their JavaScript code. And then it shows you what the rendered HTML looks like here. So if I'm flipping through here, I'm like, oh, I really like this effect, or this slide effect of being able to like have one image slide right over another. I feel like that's really slick. Well, I could see how to do that all right here. And then it allows me to say, I want to have that kind of feature in my portfolio page. Let me see how it's implemented and then use that kind of implementation on my own project. So again, this is just one of the many playgrounds. You can create an account here as well, share your own kind of explorations and your own experiments with other users. And if you do that, that's again, another thing you can go ahead and publish in your resume just to illustrate that you're an active community member to, a collaborative coding community. So in this case, it'd be CodePen, but there's a number of different communities like this. Another playpen that's also very common is like Jsfiddle, for instance. And then I can't help but illustrate this enough. It's important to go ahead and also when you're learning to go to MDN, the Mozilla Developer Network, and also the W3 schools. I should have those posted. The computer's spazzing out again. Lord. So give me just a moment while I wait for it to catch back up. I hope this does not affect my recording negatively. And I can't even get into my activity monitor. Hmm. Okay. Okay, so my computer just crashed. So what was the last thing that everyone had heard? Or where did I make it to CodePen before my system froze up? Okay, good. Okay, perfect. Well, this was a very apt time, I guess, for my system to crash. Hopefully, it's not all staggery and whatnot. I got to see what data I've just now lost because it prompted a reboot. But I will say we have a couple of moments left, and I want to let me load up my. I think all I wanted to do that was left over was to be able to then field whatever questions that you might have up to this point for either Lab 1 or Lab 2 or the homework or anything we discussed in this lecture so that we can go ahead and have any of that resolved. So is there any questions, or does the content so far, the HTML, is there anything that has happened in the labs? Okay, so the CSS lab and the first homework are both due on Friday. I will say, I want to say at least one person already completed the CSS lab. The CSS lab should not be difficult to get done. It should take no more than about 2 or maybe 3 hours to get done. No, let me actually get the attendance sheet right now. I want to do that at the tail end so I could get everyone. Give me just a moment. So, as I'll grab what I need for that. And that's not what I want. This. I just have to renavigate to everything since I crashed. That's what I want. Do that. Let me grab this. Let me shorten that. Let me grab that. And there we go. Okay, will we have a homework and lab every week? Yeah, so the goal is to try to maximize the goal is to have a lab that is a companion to any new material that we cover, any new technology. I should say every new technology. So the dev tools, for instance, we won't have a lab that goes over being able to use Chrome to explore your code. But when we covered CSS and a lecture component, there was definitely a lab attached to that so that you could actually see what it meant to implement the CSS concepts that was discussed in the lecture. Very similar, there was an HTML lab to cover the concepts discussed in the HTML portion of the first lecture. Next lecture, I'm about halfway done. The slides for it will be to go ahead and talk about Bootstrap. And I showed you an example of Bootstrap moments ago for a portfolio page. The next lab will be to actually implement Bootstrap in practice so that you can see what it's like to use that technology and be able to build a responsive site. And then there will be a homework. I'll already tell you what the homework is attached to that lab. It will be to build your own portfolio page using Bootstrap that is as good, if not better, than the sample project that you build using the lab instructions. And you won't be able to use the same lab format. You could be inspired by it, but you'll have to put your own spin on it in some kind of way to ensure that everyone has their own portfolio page. So I'll already let you know what the third homework is going to be. So yeah, the goal is every time we learn a new technology, if it's at all possibly feasible, to try to fit at least a small homework project around it. Now, the homework projects will probably lean up a little bit once we get to JavaScript, and it takes more time to do. So like the first homework is write an interactive story in HTML. And then the second homework will be to use CSS to style your interactive story. And the third will be to publish a portfolio page that has where you'll host a blog and where you'll host your projects, and that talks a little bit about yourself. Then we'll talk about JavaScript, and we'll start talking about building our first JavaScript application, something that's a little bit more tangible and real, like a real world application that runs in the browser. So does that answer your question? So I'm trying to do labs and assignments based off of ensuring that you feel comfortable with the technology that we're covering. So so I want to view it as more like, instead of week-based, more like technology-based. So since we're like going through technologies relatively quickly, we're going through homeworks and labs relatively quickly. But it might slow down with the volume of what happens when we hit JavaScript. I might spend two weeks or 3 weeks in JavaScript to go from the very simple basics to something that's far more complicated. Okay, so here's the other thing. Would you rather a scaled down, because I wanted to pose this question to the class, would you rather something that's more scaled down with Bootstrap? So you saw my initial sample project. That's what I deployed moments ago. That's what I gave you a demo of for deploying something to GitHub Pages. Would you prefer something that is more complex like that shows you how to build that exact thing? Or would you prefer something that was less steps and just kind of covered the basics? Okay, so what I'll try to do is meet in the middle. So that's my big concern about doing something that's overly complex in the lab, is that the entire point of the homework is to go ahead and build something better than the lab. So I don't want to do anything that it's too nice. So probably what I'll do is I'll do some basics. I might do some bonus concepts that are optional. I like that idea. So I'll scale it down to be a really basic step-by-steps. I'll put in some optional, this is how you do things that are fancier. I like that. That's exactly what I'll do. So I'll limit it to be more basic. And for those who are interested on what my original version ended up being, I'll put an optional component of, this is how you can improve this part. This is how you can improve this part. And then I'll challenge everyone to build their own, as that homework assignment, it'll be to build your own portfolio page. And so the real trick, though, is your portfolio page is going to have to be unique to you and your own design. It should be an expression. It should be an individualistic expression of yourself. And so we're gonna learn how to use Bootstrap so that each person can produce their own portfolio that will be publicly available through GitHub Pages, and that'll be essentially your first thing that we've produced in this class that you can then start citing on your resume and use to help to help sell yourself to future prospective employers. And then actually the first project you can put in there would be your interactive story project. Oh yeah, that's one of the big things about Bootstrap is the different breakpoints. So we will definitely make the lab. So I'll scale the lab down. I'll finish about halfway through my PowerPoint, so they should be done for Thursday's lecture. So we'll go ahead and do Thursday on Bootstrap, and then I'll go ahead and get the third lab document probably done by, I would say, since I'll refactor it a little bit, what the project's based off of, probably about Friday or Saturday is what I'll target, so that after the CSS lab is done, for those who want to immediately go right into the Bootstrap lab, that'll be available to you. Okay, well, with that said, I think we covered everything I wanted to cover today, which was just really a crash course in dev tools and how to launch your projects onto GitHub pages so that there wouldn't be much questions about that as we continue to move forward. And so I just thought this was a good opportunity now that we know HTML and CSS to be able to see what the data is that's being kind of displayed to us from the browser perspective to help us aid in debugging or to be able to analyze and look at other people's code. Yes, yeah, you can continue to update your projects even after you turn them in. I would advocate for that. Like, the idea is that the more work you put into these projects, the better it's going to be as a portfolio piece that you can really show off. So yeah, I like the idea of constant improvement on whatever you're working on. And then I'll also give you this option too. If you wanted to go ahead and redo a project audit and you continually improve a project, I'll even regrade it so that it doesn't even feel like wasted time. You could just go ahead and request another project audit. Oh, that's the other big thing, the project audit. So in Discord, let me show that before I close out today. So let me relaunch Discord and just show everyone where they can go when they're ready to get a grade for assignment. So the only way you get a grade for an assignment, as I said before, is you go into the request audit. Oh, wait, I'm not sharing my screen. Okay, there we go. So whenever you're finished an assignment and you want to go ahead and actually get your grade, a part of submitting your assignments is to submit your source code on Moodle. But you won't get a letter grade until we have essentially a one-on-one where we do a live video chat and you show off from your end what your project is, and then we'll delve into the source code and you can kind of show me how you were able to implement that. So we're going to arrange, we have 34 people in this class. So in order to manage the scheduling for that, whenever you're ready to show something off, or if you want to have a one-on-one debug session with me. This is not restricted to just showing off final projects. If you run into a roadblock or an obstacle and you need help, you need paired programming from someone else, I will offer my assistance. So you could just go ahead and request a time from me here as well. So here, you just go to request audit, you type in the time you want, and then if it's a time that is available to me, I will then go ahead and publish and then delete your original message. So right now, I have my unavailable times published here. I have currently one project audit set up at the moment for 4 p.m. on Wednesday. Okay, so with that said, is there any other questions? Excellent. Okay, everyone have a good one. I will see everyone on Thursday, and we'll be talking about Bootstrap then. And if you have any other questions after lecture, just go ahead and hit me up on Discord.